The rain hammered the penthouse windows like fists of judgment. But inside the marble-floored living room of the Harrington estate on Manhattan's Upper East Side, the storm was just getting started. Jackson Harrington, 22 and already carrying the weight of a lifetime's rejection, stood frozen as his father's voice sliced through the air. "You're no son of mine, not anymore." The words landed like a gut punch. But it was his mother's silence, her averted eyes fixed on the crystal chandelier above, that shattered him completely. In that instant, Jackson saw it all unravel. The family photos on the mantel where he'd been airbrushed out years ago. The better son his parents had paraded at galas. The little brother they'd molded into their perfect heir. But the real betrayal? It was the boy he'd loved in secret, hidden away like a shameful footnote, now dangling as the final thread to snap. As the doorman dragged him toward the elevator, Jackson's last glimpse was of his father's smug nod toward the door, whispering to his mother, "We'll find a way to fix this mess." Fix it? They'd already replaced him, but they had no idea what storm he'd bring back. Jackson stumbled out of the Harrington building into the relentless downpour of a late autumn night in 2018, the kind of New York rain that soaked you to the bone and washed away any illusions of home. His backpack, stuffed with a few changes of clothes, a dog-eared copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and the silver chain his grandmother had left him before she died, slapped against his thigh as he dodged puddles on Fifth Avenue. Cars hissed by, their headlights cutting through the sheets of water like accusatory beams, and for a moment, he wondered if he should just hail a cab to JFK and vanish into the ether. But where? The Midwest he'd fled at 18, chasing his parents' approval in the form of an Ivy League acceptance? Or back to the cramped Queens apartment where he'd first tasted freedom, only to have it yanked away? His phone buzzed in his pocket, a lifeline he couldn't afford to ignore. It was a text from Daniel. "Where are you? Dinner's getting cold." Daniel Ruiz, the barista with the crooked smile and eyes like polished obsidian, who worked doubles at that hole-in-the-wall cafe in Chelsea and dreamed of painting murals that could change the world. They'd met 6 months ago, a chance collision when Jackson, nursing a post-breakup hangover, spilled his latte across the counter and Daniel laughed instead of yelling. From there, it was stolen kisses in alleyways, late-night confessions under the glow of bodega signs, and the kind of love that felt like rebellion in a city that chewed up dreamers. But tonight, Jackson couldn't face it. Not yet. He powered off his phone and ducked into a dive bar on 78th Street, the kind with sticky floors and a jukebox crooning Springsteen. "Whiskey. Neat," he muttered to the bartender, a grizzled vet named Mick who slid the glass over without a word. Jackson downed it in one burn, the fire in his throat mirroring the one in his chest. His father, Richard Harrington, CEO of Harrington Investments, had discovered the photos, grainy shots from a pride rally Jackson had attended incognito, arms slung around Daniel's waist. "This isn't us," his father had thundered, slamming the phone down. "You're embarrassing the family. And that boy, he's the reason you're throwing your life away." His mother, Evelyn, had wrung her hands, her pearls clicking like rosary beads. "Jackie, please. Think of your brother. Ethan's only 16. He looks up to you, Ethan, the golden child, with his straight-A report cards and crew-cut precision, the son they'd always wanted." Jackson had overheard the whispers years ago, after his own coming out at 15, a hushed argument about fixing him with therapy, prayer circles from Evelyn's country club friends. When that failed, they poured everything into Ethan: private tutors, lacrosse camps, the works. Jackson became the afterthought, the sensitive one shuttled off to boarding school in Connecticut. Another whiskey, and the bar's haze blurred the edges. Jackson scrolled through old texts from Daniel, heart emojis and inside jokes about bad rom-coms. "I love you more than pizza at 3 a.m., Daniel had written last week. God, what would he say now? That the Harringtons had cut him off. No trust fund. No apartment. No safety net? That Richard had threatened to handle Daniel if Jackson didn't end it clean? The door to the bar swung open, letting in a gust of wet wind, and Jackson looked up, half hoping, half dreading. It wasn't Daniel. Just a couple of suits shaking off umbrellas, laughing about some merger. Jackson paid his tab with the last 20 in his wallet and stepped back into the storm, the city a glittering beast indifferent to his unraveling. He walked for hours, blocks bleeding into one another, until his feet carried him to the familiar stoop in Chelsea. Daniel's building, a walk-up with peeling paint and a buzzer that always stuck. He pressed it anyway, the rain mingling with tears he hadn't realized were falling. The door buzzed open, and there was Daniel, in faded jeans and a paint-splattered tee, his dark hair tousled from running fingers through it. "Jax? Jesus, you're drenched. What happened?" Those arms wrapped around him, pulling him inside, and for the first time that night, Jackson let himself break. Sobs racked his body as Daniel held him on the threadbare couch, murmuring Spanish endearments Jackson didn't understand but felt in his soul. "Talk to me, mi amor. Whatever it is, we'll face it, by dawn." Over mugs of reheated coffee, Jackson spilled it all, the confrontation, the disownment, the venomous promise from his father. "If you walk out that door, you're dead to us. And we'll make sure that Ruiz Kid regrets ever crossing paths with you." Daniel's face hardened, but his grip on Jackson's hand never wavered. "They don't scare me. And they sure as hell don't get to define us." They made love then, slow and desperate, bodies entwining like roots seeking soil in cracked concrete. It was a reclaiming, a vow whispered against sweat-damp skin. "We're enough." The next weeks blurred into survival mode. Jackson crashed on Daniel's couch. Technically, since the one-bedroom was all Daniel could swing on his salary, pounding the pavement for gigs. Barista shifts at a midtown Starbucks. Freelance graphic design for indie bands. Anything to keep the lights on. Daniel painted late into the night, his canvases alive with vibrant strokes of rebellion. Queer icons reimagined as superheroes, cityscapes where shadows held hands. They pooled pennies for groceries, laughed over ramen noodles, and found poetry in the mundane. A shared cigarette on the fire escape, watching the sun rise over the Hudson. But the shadows of the Harringtons loomed. Unmarked envelopes arrived at Daniel's door. Photos of Jackson and him at a queer poetry slam. Scrawled notes warning stay away or pay. Jackson's old friends from prep school ghosted him, and whispers reached him through the grapevine. Richard pulling strings to blackball him from entry-level finance jobs. "It's them," Jackson confided one night, as they lay tangled in sheets that smelled of turpentine and cheap wine. "Dad's playing dirty." Daniel traced the line of Jackson's jaw, his touch a bomb. "Then we fight smarter. You're not alone anymore." He pulled out a sketch pad, flipping to a page of intricate tattoos, symbols of resilience, intertwined vines spelling resist. "Get this with me? A mark that says we're unbreakable." Jackson nodded, throat tight. In a dingy parlor in the village, under the buzz of neon, they etched their story into skin. Jackson's on his ribcage, Daniel's on his forearm. It hurt like hell, but it was the good kind of pain, the kind that promised healing. Yet doubt crept in like fog off the East River. Ethan called once, voice cracking over a blocked number. "Bro, come home. Mom's a wreck." "Dad says it's a phase." Jackson hung up, heart splintering. Was it? No, the phase had been pretending, burying his love for Daniel under layers of Harrington expectations. But the call lingered, a tether to the boy he'd once been, the brother he'd shielded from their father's rages. Fall turned to winter, snow blanketing the city in false purity. They scraped by, love their only currency, until the eviction notice came, rent hiked again, Daniel's tips drying up with the holiday slump. "We could go west," Daniel suggested over lukewarm eggs at a diner. "LA? Portland. Somewhere the air doesn't taste like money." Jackson hesitated, the pull of Manhattan's chaos warring with the dream of reinvention. But before he could answer, his phone lit up. An unknown number. Ethan's school ID flashing in the caller preview. "Jax, it's bad," Ethan whispered, panic threading his words. "Dad found out about the rally pics. He's sending people after Daniel. Said to clean up the loose ends. Please, come back." For me, the line went dead, and Jackson's world tilted. Betrayal burned anew, not just from his parents, but from the brother he'd protected, now unwittingly complicit. Daniel watched him, eyes searching. "What now?" Jackson stood, resolve hardening like frost. "Now, we end this. On our terms." The Greyhound bus to Boston reeked of stale coffee and desperation. But Jackson and Daniel squeezed into seats at the back, shoulders brushing in silent solidarity. It was January 2019. The Northeast gripped in a deep freeze that mirrored the chill in Jackson's veins. Ethan had texted coordinates to a dingy motel off I-95, a neutral ground where the Harrington long arm might not reach so quickly. "Just talk to him," Daniel urged as the bus lurched out of Port Authority, his hand warm on Jackson's knee. "Your brother's not the enemy. Remember that summer at the Cape? You two building sandcastles against the tide." Jackson managed a ghost of a smile, the memory surfacing like a buoy. 12-year-old Ethan, gap-toothed and fearless, daring waves while Jackson played lifeguard, their laughter drowning out their father's distant bellows from the yacht club. That was before of awkward puberty. Stolen glances at the lifeguards, the quiet horror of realizing he was different. "Yeah," he murmured, leaning his head on Daniel's shoulder. But tides change. The motel was a squat brick eyesore, neon vacancy sign flickering like a bad omen. Ethan waited in the parking lot, bundled in a parka too big for his lanky frame, breath fogging the air. Spotting Jackson, he bolted forward, wrapping him in a hug that smelled of teenage cologne and fear. "You came. God, Jax, I thought." His voice broke, eyes darting to Daniel lingering by the bus stop. "Who's he?" "Daniel," Jackson said firmly, pulling his brother into a proper embrace. "The guy who saved me when you couldn't. No accusation, just truth, raw and unfiltered, the American way of laying cards on the table." Inside the room, with its threadbare quilt and humming space heater, the brothers faced off. Ethan paced, words tumbling out. The family dinners turned interrogations. Evelyn's wine-fueled confessions about losing Jackson. Richard's late-night calls to private investigators. "He's obsessed, Jax." Thinks Daniel's some gold digger turning you deviant. Last week, he cornered me, said if I didn't help bring you home, he'd ship me off to military school. Ethan's fists clenched, knuckles white. I hate him for it. For all of it. Jackson's heart cracked open, seeing the fractures in the better son facade. They talked for hours, Daniel chiming in with quiet stories of his own. Growing up in the Bronx with a single mom who worked 3 jobs, coming out to a family that chose silence over screams. Love isn't a phase, Daniel said, locking eyes with Ethan. It's the fight worth having. By midnight, Ethan was asleep on the lumpy bed. Jackson and Daniel curled on the floor, whispering futures. Art school for Daniel, a small firm for Jackson where merit mattered more than bloodlines. Dawn brought a fragile truce. Ethan promised to stonewall their father, feed him half-truths about Jackson finding himself in Europe. Stay safe, he begged, hugging them both at the door. You're still my brother. Always. As the bus pulled away, Jackson watched Ethan's figure shrink in the rearview, a pang of what-ifs twisting in his gut. Could family heal, or was it just another illusion peddled by Hallmark cards? Back in New York, the city thawed unevenly, slush turning sidewalks into treacherous slides. They threw themselves into a rhythm. Jackson landed a gig designing logos for a queer-owned bookstore in Brooklyn, Daniel's paintings catching the eye of a gallery scout at a pop-up show. Their love deepened in the details. Daniel's habit of leaving doodles on Post-its, Jackson's playlists curated for rainy commutes. Sex was their sanctuary, bodies mapping each other's scars. The faint line on Daniel's hip from a childhood fall, the tattoo on Jackson's ribs blooming red around the edges. But Richard Harrington didn't relent. The threats escalated. Tires slashed on Daniel's beat-up Honda. Anonymous emails to Jackson's new clients hinting at instability. One night, after a shift, Daniel came home with a split lip, eyes haunted. Some suits jumped me outside the cafe. Said to tell you, Daddy's watching. Jackson's blood boiled, visions of confrontation flashing, storming the penthouse, fists flying in some cinematic showdown. But Daniel shook his head, dabbing ice on the bruise. Not like that. We rise above, remember, like those vines on our skin. They channeled it into creation. Daniel poured the pain into a massive canvas. 2 figures entwined against a storm of corporate towers, colors bleeding defiance. Jackson wrote, feverish journal entries that morphed into short stories submitted to literary mags. Rejection slips piled up, but so did acceptances. A piece in Out magazine about queer exile in the city that never sleeps. It went viral in niche circles, drawing messages from others who'd been cast out, sons and daughters of privilege, bartered for perfection. Spring bloomed tentative, cherry blossoms dusting Washington Square Park where they picnicked on stolen moments. Ethan visited once, sneaking down on a school trip, the 3 of them wandering the village like ghosts of what could be. Dad's cracking, Ethan confided over falafel. Mom left him a note, something about enough damage. Maybe there's hope. Jackson wanted to believe it, but the call came that night. Evelyn, voice slurry with Merlot, begging him to come home for Easter. Ethan's asking. No mention of Daniel, of course. We go, Daniel decided, surprising Jackson. But together. Show them we're a package deal. It was madness, facing the lion's den arm in arm. But in Daniel's eyes, Jackson saw the romance of it. Knights errant in chinos and hoodies, charging windmills of prejudice. Easter Sunday dawned crisp. The Harrington estate a bastion of WASP opulence. manicured lawns, a spread of honey-glazed ham and deviled eggs. Richard greeted them at the door with a smile like shark teeth, Evelyn hovering pale and pinched. Ethan shot Jackson a thumbs up from the foyer, but the air crackled with undercurrents. Over mimosas, Richard launched in, "Jackson, son, glad you reconsidered. This friend of yours," a nod to Daniel, "he seems ambitious. That article, bold move." Daniel met the gaze evenly, fork pausing midair. "It's our story, Mr. Harrington. Not a phase, not a scandal." The table tensed, Evelyn's hand fluttering to her throat. But it was Ethan's quiet, "He's right, Dad," that ignited the fuse. Richard's face purpled. "You too, Ethan? After everything I've given you." The argument erupted, accusations flying like shrapnel. Jackson's selfishness, Daniel's influence, Ethan's ingratitude. Jackson stood, chair scraping, pulling Daniel up with him. "We're leaving. And if you come after us again, any of us, I'll go public. Every dirty secret, every fixed deal at your firm." They stormed out, the slam of the oak door echoing like thunder. In the driveway, under a sky-threatening rain, Daniel laughed, a wild, freeing sound. "That was badass." Jackson kissed him fiercely, tasting salt and victory. But as they peeled away in a borrowed cab, Jackson's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You think that's over? Watch your back, Harrington." The betrayal deepened when Ethan called later, voice hollow, "Dad's sending me to boarding school. Said I need straightening out. It's because of you, us." Guilt gnawed at Jackson, but Daniel's hand on his steadied the storm. "He's tougher than he looks. And so are we." Summer sweltered in, the city a pressure cooker of heat and hope. Jackson's story led to a book deal, small press, but real, and Daniel's mural commission for a community center sealed their lease on a proper apartment in Bushwick. Love flourished in the chaos. Rooftop barbecues with queer found family, midnight swims in the East River, promises etched in sweat and starlight. But the shadows lengthened. Richard's watchers multiplied, strange cars idling outside their building, calls to Daniel's mom in the Bronx, veiled threats laced with legalese. One humid August night, it shattered. Jackson came home from a signing to find Daniel gone, the apartment ransacked, a note scrawled on the fridge in red marker, "He's with friends now. Stay away." Panic clawed Jackson's throat. He tore through the streets, heart pounding a war drum, dialing Ethan's number until it connected. "Where is he? What did Dad do?" Ethan's whisper was a knife. "They took him." "To talk, Jax. I'm sorry. I tried to warn you." The betrayal was total, a chasm swallowing everything. Jackson hailed a cab to the Harrington building, rage fueling his stride. But the penthouse was empty. Summer Hampton's escape, the doorman said. Alone in the echoing lobby, Jackson sank to the marble floor, the city lights mocking him through the glass. He'd lost Daniel, the one person who'd made him whole. Or had he? A final text from Daniel's phone. "I'm okay. Love you. Fight smart." It was enough. Jackson rose, resolve forging anew. The return wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation. And he'd bring hell with him. The Hamptons in late summer was a glittering farce. Manicured hedges hiding the rot beneath. Ocean breezes carrying the faint tang of old money and newer sins. Jackson arrived unannounced, hitching a ride with a sympathetic journalist from his book tour. The kind of ally who'd smelled a story in the Harrington downfall. It was September 2019, the air thick with salt and secrets, and Jackson's plan was simple. Infiltrate, extract, expose. No gunslinging heroics, just the quiet fury of a son scorned, armed with a USB drive of Richard's embezzlement emails, pilfered from Ethan's reluctant hack into the family server. He'd spent the drive from the city piecing it together. Daniel wasn't with friends. Richard's PI cronies had snatched him from their Bushwick stoop, bundling him into a black SUV bound for a rehab facility in upstate New York, the kind that cured inconvenient loves with electroshock whispers and isolation. Ethan's confession had come in a frantic midnight call. Dad's unhinged. Jax thinks he's saving you by breaking him. Mom's enabling it. Pills and denial. The betrayal stung deepest from Evelyn, who'd once bandaged Jackson's scraped knees with stories of unconditional love. Now, complicit silence. Jackson checked into a roadside motel under a false name, the room smelling of mildew and regret. He paced the frayed carpet, phone clutched like a talisman, waiting for the signal from Ethan. Coast clear. Back gate unlocked. His brother, the better son, had flipped, whispers of Richard's affairs leaking to tabloids, Ethan's anonymous tips to the SEC about Harrington Investments' shady offshore accounts. For Daniel, Ethan had texted. And for us. Dusk fell like a curtain, and Jackson slipped into the Harrington compound under cover of twilight. The estate sprawled like a jealous lover, white-clabbered mansion, infinity pool merging with the Atlantic, guest cottages where deals were sealed in cigar smoke. He navigated the shadows, heart hammering, until the back patio materialized, French doors ajar, laughter spilling out like poisoned champagne. There they were, Richard holding court with cronies, Evelyn perched porcelain perfect, Ethan slouched in a corner, eyes flicking nervously. No sign of Daniel. Panic flickered, but Jackson steeled himself, stepping into the light. Evening. Family. Gasps rippled. Richard's scotch glass halted mid-sip, face twisting from jovial to feral. The prodigal returns. And empty-handed. I see. Evelyn rose, hand to mouth, but her eyes, oh, those eyes, held a glimmer of something like relief, buried under layers of shame. Where is he? Jackson demanded, voice low thunder. Daniel. You had no right. Ethan bolted up, positioning between them. Dad. Stop this. It's over. But Richard waved him off, rising like a colossus. Right? That spick barista was poisoning you. Boy. I fixed it, sent him to a place that'll make him normal. Like Ethan here. The room froze. Jackson's vision tunneled. Rage a red haze. Normal? You mean broken? Like you tried with me? He yanked the USB from his pocket, slamming it on the mahogany table. Or like this, your investments in shell companies, skimming millions from widows and orphans. I have it all. Emails, transfers. One click to the feds. Richard laughed, a bark devoid of humor. Bluff. You'd destroy yourself too, Harrington name in the mud. But doubt cracked his facade. Eyes darting to Evelyn, who finally spoke. Voice of fragile reed. Richard. Enough. He's our son. The dam broke then, not with fists, but words. Jackson unloaded. The boarding school isolation, the therapy quacks peddling conversion lies, the way they'd funneled love into Ethan while starving him of it. You replaced me because I dared to love like this. He gestured to his heart. Fiercely, without your script. And Daniel? He's the best thing that ever happened to me. The person you failed to protect because he wasn't born with your last name. Evelyn crumpled, sobs racking her frame. Ethan crossed to Jackson, grip fierce. I'm sorry, bro. I should have fought sooner. Richard lunged for the drive, but Jackson sidestepped, phone already dialing a contact from the journalists' network, a DA with a grudge against white-collar wolves. Sirens wailed distant, closing in. Chaos erupted. Richard bellowing orders to his PI shadows, who melted into the dunes. Evelyn clutching Jackson's arm, whispering apologies laced with regret. I was scared, Jackie, of losing you two. This life. He pulled away gently. You did lose me, Mom. But maybe not forever. Daniel was the priority. Ethan spilled the facility's address, a Gothic pile in the Catskills, masquerading as a wellness retreat. Jackson commandeered Richard's Bentley. Keys snatched in the fray and tore north, the ocean a silver blur in the moonlight. The drive was agony, mind replaying worst-case horrors. Bruises blooming on Daniel's skin, spirit bent under treatments designed to erase him. He arrived at dawn, the facility's gates yawning like iron jaws. Bribing the night guard with a wad of emergency cash, last of his advance money, Jackson slipped inside, corridors echoing with muffled cries. Daniel's room was at the end, door locked, but the window yielded to a hurled rock. There he was, pale, for drip snaking his arm, eyes dull but igniting at Jackson's face. Jax, a whisper, then arms around his neck, kiss desperate and tasting of chemicals. How? Family reunion gone wrong, Jackson quipped, unhooking the drip with trembling hands. Come on, poet. Time to paint our escape. They fled into the mist-shrouded woods, Daniel leaning on him, breaths ragged but free. Half a mile out, a stolen pickup waited Ethan's doing, keys under the mat. Back in the city by noon, they holed up in a safe house courtesy of Jackson's literary agent, a cozy brownstone in Harlem, stocked with takeout and TLC. Daniel slept for 16 hours, waking to Jackson's vigil, fingers tracing the bruises fading to yellow. They tried, Daniel murmured, voice hoarse. Talks, pills. Said you didn't love me, that it was a delusion. Tears welled, but Jackson kissed them away. Delusion? Baby, you're my reality. Revelations poured out over days of recovery. Richard arrested on fraud charges. The USB a smoking gun. Evelyn filing for divorce, citing irreparable harm. Ethan bunking with an aunt in Boston, plotting his own escape to college far from the empire's shadow. The media frenzy was biblical, headlines screaming Harrington heir exposes dynasty's dark side. But Jackson and Daniel dodged it, focusing on mending. Love rekindled in the quiet. Slow dances to Nina Simone on a vintage record player. Shared baths scented with lavender stolen from the garden. Marry me? Daniel asked one evening. On the fire escape under a canopy of stars. Ring a simple silver band etched with vines. Jackson's yes was a vow, sealing cracks with gold. But conflict simmered. Evelyn reached out, a tear-streaked voicemail. I failed you both. Can we talk? Jackson hesitated, the romantic in him yearning for redemption, the dramatist bracing for more pain. Daniel squeezed his hand. Your call, amor. But whatever, I'm here. They met in Central Park, autumn leaves crunching underfoot like fragile truces. Evelyn arrived alone, diminished, hair graying at the temples, eyes hollowed by scandal's glare. "I was wrong," she began, voice quivering. "About everything. Your father. He twisted me. But seeing you fight, for love, for truth, it woke me." She extended a check, not for hush money, but for Ethan's tuition, Jackson's book. Not redemption. Just a start. Jackson accepted, but with boundaries. Supervised visits. Therapy for all. Daniel's family now. Fail him again. And it's done. She nodded, tears carving paths through makeup, and for the first time, hugged him without reservation. Mother to son, flawed but trying. Winter crept in, bringing trials of its own. Richard's trial loomed, subpoenas dragging Jackson into depositions where old wounds reopened. Daniel's PTSD surfaced in nightmares, paintings turning abstract storms of rage. Yet romance persisted. A surprise trip to Provincetown, where they renewed vows on a dune at sunset, waves crashing applause. To us, Daniel toasted with cheap bubbly. The unbreakable. The climax brewed in spring 2020, pandemic shadows lengthening. Richard, out on bail, cornered Ethan at his aunt's, a desperate bid to reclaim the last Harrington. Ethan fought back, calling Jackson mid-scuffle. "He's lost it, bro. Says he'll ruin us all." Jackson raced cross-state, Daniel in tow, arriving to a standoff in the aunt's driveway. Richard wild-eyed, gun in hand, not loaded, but threat enough. "Give me my sons," Richard roared, but Jackson stepped forward, unarmed, voice steady. "We're not yours to own. Put it down. This ends now." Daniel flanked him, a united front, and in that charged silence, Evelyn arrived, tires screeching, phone dialing 911. Richard deflated, weapon clattering to asphalt, sobs racking the man who'd once towered invincible. Cops hauled him away, Evelyn's testimony sealing his fate. Fraud, kidnapping, emotional abuse. The family fractured irreparably, but in the shards, something human emerged, Ethan moving in with them, Evelyn rebuilding in therapy, Richard facing bars and reflection. Through it all, Jackson and Daniel's love was the constant. Tender in crisis, passionate in calm. "We survived the storm," Daniel said one night, as they lay in their Bushwick bed. City hum a lullaby. Jackson traced the tattoo on his lover's arm. "And we'll dance in the rain." The courtroom in downtown Manhattan was a sterile coliseum, all polished wood and fluorescent glare, where the Harrington empire crumbled under the weight of its own greed. It was June 2020, masks muffling the murmurs of reporters crammed into pews, the air thick with sanitizer and schadenfreude. Jackson sat in the gallery, Daniel's hand a steady anchor in his lap, Ethan's lanky form wedged beside them. Three misfits in a sea of suits, united against the patriarch who'd bartered their souls for stock options. Richard Harrington stood at the defense table, once a titan in bespoke wool, now shrunken in off-the-rack gray, jowls sagging under the assault of depositions and denial. The charges read like a litany of sins: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit assault. But the real gut punch was the civil suit Jackson had filed: emotional distress, wrongful disownment, the kidnapping of Daniel as extortionate coercion. Evelyn testified first, her voice amplified by regret. "He broke us all, Your Honor. me included. Her eyes met Jackson's across the room, a silent plea for absolution he wasn't ready to grant. The prosecutor called Daniel next, his testimony a masterclass in quiet fire. Unmasked for the record, he described the snatch from Bushwick. Rough hands, hood overhead, the facility's cold interrogations laced with homophobic venom. They called it therapy, Daniel said, voice even, but it was torture. To erase who I am, who we are. Gasps rippled. The judge leaned forward, pen scratching notes. Richard's lawyer objected furiously. Speculative, inflammatory, but the damage stuck. A stain on the Harrington ledger. Jackson's turn came like a storm front. He took the stand in a simple button-down, no tie, rejecting the armor of his upbringing. My father didn't just steal money, he began, eyes locking on Richard's averted gaze. He stole futures. Mine, my brother's, the man I love. He detailed the disownment, the threats, the better son, grooming that left Ethan a shell of resentment. I returned not for revenge, but justice. For Daniel, who you failed to protect because his blood wasn't blue enough. The courtroom held its breath as Jackson pulled the emotional thread. Readings from his book, excerpts woven with Daniel's poetry, verses of love as resistance, scrawled during recovery. This is what you tried to kill, he said, voice cracking just enough to humanize. And this is why we won. Cheers erupted as he stepped down. Subdued, but electric, reporters scribbling furiously. Recess brought a confrontation in the hallway. Richard, flanked by guards, cornering Jackson with a feral whisper. You think this ends me? I'll bury you in appeals. Paint you as the ungrateful fag who... Daniel surged forward, Ethan at his side. But Jackson held up a hand, calm as a summer sea. It's over. That. You built nothing worth saving. Security dragged Richard away, his curses echoing, but in his eyes flickered defeat. Not rage, but the hollow of a man seeing his reflection unvarnished. The trial dragged into July, verdicts stacking like dominoes. Guilty on all counts, 20 years minimum, restitution in the millions. Evelyn got the house, Ethan a trust fund untainted, Jackson and Daniel a settlement that funded dreams, a gallery for Daniel's art, a nonprofit for queer youth exiled by family. The tabloids feasted, fallen tycoon unmasked by son's love story, but Jackson tuned it out, focusing on the aftershocks. Fallout rippled through their lives like after tremors. Ethan enrolled at NYU, majoring in social work, gonna help kids like us, bro, crashing their couch on weekends, the three forging a brotherhood unscarred by blood. Evelyn rebuilt tentatively, weekly brunches at a neutral cafe, where apologies evolved into stories, her own closeted youth in the 70s, stifled by debutante balls and a marriage of convenience. I see you now, Jackie. You and Daniel, you're the poetry I never wrote. Romance bloomed amid the rubble. With the settlement, they bought a fixer-upper in Ditmas Park, Brooklyn, a Victorian with creaky floors and a garden begging for Daniel's touch. Renovations became metaphors, sanding old wounds, painting over hate with hues of hope. Nights were for each other, candlelit dinners of takeout paella, slow grinds under quilts as rain pattered the roof. You're my home, Jackson murmured one evening, tracing constellations on Daniel's back. Wherever the hell that is. But conflict lingered, a dramatic undercurrent refusing easy resolution. Richard's appeals dragged. Appeals laced with smears, leaked affidavits painting Jackson as vindictive, Daniel as opportunistic. Hate mail flooded their inbox. Slurs from Richard's old guard. Bible verses twisted into weapons. Daniel's mom, Rosa, flew up from Florida, her rosary beads clicking judgment at first, but melting after a tearful dinner. If he makes you glow like that, Mijo, he's family. The real high tide came in December. A surprise visit from Ethan. Found this in Dad's safe. Letters he wrote to you. Never sent. Sealed envelopes. Yellowed with age. Spilling confessions. Richard's own buried shame. A college fling with a roommate ended in panic. The overcompensation in fixing Jackson. I was terrified you'd live freer than I ever could, one read. Jackson burned them in the fireplace, ashes swirling like released ghosts. Doesn't excuse it, he told Daniel, but explains the monster. New Year's Eve found them on a rooftop in the village. City fireworks exploding in defiant color. Ethan toasted with plastic flutes. To replacements that became revolutions. Laughter bubbled. But as midnight struck, Jackson pulled Daniel close, kiss deepening amid cheers. Marry me for real, he whispered. Daniel's grin was sunshine. Thought you'd never ask. Wedding planning infused winter with whimsy. A small affair in the park. Spring 2021. Under blooming dogwoods. Guests. Queer chosen family. Rosa beaming in a mantilla. Evelyn in understated pearls. Ethan as best man with a speech that slayed. Jax taught me family isn't given. It's fought for. Vows exchanged rings simple as their tattoos. In storms and sun. I choose you. Honeymoon in the Berkshires. Cabin by a lake. Days hiking trails etched with history. Thoreau's woods. Where self-reliance whispered approval. Nights were unhurried exploration. Bodies relearning each other without the weight of war. We're the story now, Daniel said, sketching Jackson by firelight. Not the tragedy. Back home. Purpose sharpened. Jackson's nonprofit. Roots reclaimed. Open doors to therapy and housing for disowned LGBTQ+ youth. First client a trans kid from Queens, echoing their start. Daniel's murals graced subways, billboards proclaiming love unerased. Success bred envy. A rival publisher lowballed Jackson's next book, Old Harrington Associates whispering sabotage. But they faced it hand in hand. Love the ultimate plot twist. The dramatic peak crested in summer. Richard's final appeal denied. Sentence upheld. He requested a visit, chained in a federal pen upstate. Voice gravel over video link. I was wrong, he croaked. I sunken. About everything. Tell Ethan. I'm proud. Jackson nodded, throat tight. Pride's earned. That. Start with yourself. No forgiveness, but a door cracked, humanity's fragile olive branch. As leaves turned, so did chapters. Ethan graduated, off to grad school with a fellowship. Evelyn dated a kind widow from her book club, finding late life spark. Jackson and Daniel adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy mutt named Whitman, family expanding in fur and forgiveness. Yet romance remained the heartbeat. Anniversaries marked with tattoos refreshed. Trips to San Francisco's Castro for inspiration. We replaced their hate with this, Daniel said one night, gesturing to their home, walls alive with art, shelves groaning books. Jackson pulled him down, love-making a symphony of gratitude. In the afterglow, he whispered, and I'd do it all again. For you. By 2025, the scars of the Harrington saga had faded to silver lines, visible in quiet moments, but woven into a tapestry stronger for the fraying. Jackson and Daniel's Ditmas Park brownstone stood as testament. Victorian bones buttressed by love's mortar, garden bursting with wildflowers Daniel coaxed from stubborn soil. It was a humid July evening, the kind where fireflies danced like errant stars, and the couple hosted a barbecue for their ever-growing circle, Ethan grilling with theatrical flair, Rosa salsa dancing with Evelyn's widow, Lorraine, laughter cutting through the cicada hum. Jackson watched from the porch swing, a beer sweating in his hand, Daniel's head on his shoulder. 30. Jackson's edges had softened, faint laugh lines framing eyes that held worlds, hair tousled longer than his prep school days. Daniel, 28, radiated that same quiet fire, his murals now international. A commission in Berlin depicting queer resilience, vines entwining Berlin walls of prejudice. Their book, co-authored, unreplaced, A Love Forged in Exile, had hit bestseller lists, proceeds fueling Roots reclaimed to 10 chapters nationwide. "Penny for him?" Daniel murmured, nuzzling closer. "Just grateful," Jackson replied, kissing his temple. "We built this from ashes." The party swelled. Queer activists swapping war stories. A non-binary artist Ethan was smitten with shy glances over veggie skewers. Music pulsed, Nina Simone yielding to Chapel Roan, anthems of unapologetic joy. As dusk deepened, Ethan clinked a glass, pulling them into an impromptu toast. To Jax and Dan, the originals who showed replacements are bullshit. And to family, the kind we choose. Cheers rose. But later, under the string lights, Evelyn pulled Jackson aside. At 62, she was a phoenix volunteering at the nonprofit. Her memoir in progress, Silver Spoon, Bitter Pill. "Your father's letter came today," she said softly, handing an envelope. "Richard, paroled early for good behavior, now in a halfway house in Florida, penitent and frail. I failed you all. But watching from afar, your strength, your love, it's my redemption. If you'll have me for holidays?" Jackson's fingers trembled, but he folded it away. "Maybe, Mom." One step. Forgiveness wasn't fireworks. It was this tentative, textured, human. Daniel joined them, arm around Jackson's waist, sensing the weight. "Whatever you decide, we're solid." They danced then, slow sway to the playlist's fade, bodies attuned like instruments long played in harmony. Autumn brought milestones. Ethan's engagement to the artist, Alex, a ceremony blending Jewish and Puerto Rican traditions. "Payback for all the hetero weddings we skipped," Ethan joked. Jackson walked him down the aisle. Daniel best man. The venue a reclaimed warehouse splashed with murals. Vows echoed their own. "In chaos and calm, I rewrite the stars with you." Winter holidays tested the thaw. They hosted, first time at the brownstone, table groaning turkey and tamales. Richard arrived last, stooped and silent. "Gift a worn copy of Leaves of Grass inscribed to my sons. Better late than never." Awkward toasts followed, laughter tentative. But Ethan's quip, "Dad, pass the gravy, not the guilt," broke ice. No hugs, but eye contact, a bridge, rickety but real. Spring 2026 unfurled renewal. Roots reclaimed expanded to policy, lobbying for disownment protections. Jackson testifying in D.C. Daniel's art installations amplifying voices. Romance evolved, baby moons to the Cape. where Jackson proposed a second time, on the beach of boyhood sandcastles, ring upgraded with emeralds like sea glass. "Forever's not enough," he said. Daniel's yes was tear-streaked, sealed with salt-kissed lips. Parenthood came via surrogacy. A boy, Theo, born in a Brooklyn hospital amid pandemic echoes, tiny fists clutching Jackson's finger. Nights blurred into feeds and fevers, but love multiplied. Daniel's lullabies in Spanish, Jackson's bedtime Whitmans, Ethan's uncle spoiling with queer fairy tales. "He'll know he's perfect," Daniel vowed, rocking Theo under nursery stars painted by hand. Challenges persisted, funding cuts to the nonprofit, trolls dredging old scandals, but they navigated with grace. Therapy a weekly ritual, date nights sacred. One stormy night, power out, candles flickering, they made love on the living room rug, Theo asleep upstairs. "Still my rebel," Jackson whispered, tracing vines faded but fierce. Years layered like patina. Theo's first steps toward Daniel's easel, Ethan's twins toddling in, Evelyn's remarriage to Lorraine, a quiet ceremony in the garden, Jackson officiating with vows borrowed from their own. Richard passed in 2030, peacefully. Letter to Jackson, "You were always the better son. Teach Theo that." Buried without fanfare, but mourned in private, closure, not celebration. By 2040, gray threaded their hair, but passion burned undimmed. Retirement found them in a coastal cottage in Maine, waves crashing like applause, garden wild as their youth. Theo, now a teen activist, visited with his partner, a poet echoing Daniel's fire. "You guys are legends," he said, and Jackson laughed, pulling Daniel close. "Nah, just us." Loving loud, on their golden anniversary, under a pergola draped in vines, they renewed vows again. Family gathered, sea wind carrying words. They tried to replace us, but we returned unbreakable. To the person I failed to protect, I succeeded every day since. Kisses amid cheers, hands entwined, tattoos silvered but symbolic. Life's drama waned to denouement. Sunsets shared on the porch, books co-written in tandem, love a quiet revolution. Jackson's final manuscript, Eternal Replacements, ended thus. In the end, family isn't blood or fortune. It's the heart that holds, the hand that heals. We returned not as victims, but victors, with the love they couldn't touch. And in that American dream, flawed, fierce, forever, they found their ever after. Not perfect, but profoundly human.